The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the sound. A soft, mechanical rhythm, steady, indifferent, almost comforting if you didn't know what it meant. The monitor beside Daniel's bed beeped in perfect intervals, like it had no idea it was measuring the last fragile pieces of a human life. For 6 days, that sound had become the center of my world. I sat in the same chair the entire time. It was stiff, plastic, and unforgiving, but I barely felt it anymore. My body had stopped complaining somewhere between the first sleepless night and the third cup of cold coffee. Room 217. That was our entire universe now.
And it was empty.
Not physically. Machines filled the corners. Tubes ran into Daniel's arms. Oxygen flowed steadily, but emotionally, it was hollow. No footsteps rushing in.
No laughter.
No whispered conversations in the hallway waiting for updates. Just me. And him. Across the hall, it was different. Room 215 was always full. I didn't mean occasionally. I meant constantly. People came and went like waves, children, grandchildren, friends, even neighbors. I heard laughter echo from behind the door. Once, someone brought balloons. Another time, I caught the smell of fresh pastries drifting into the hallway. Yesterday, I counted 11 people squeezed into that room. 11. They were celebrating because their father had opened his eyes. I remember staring at their door longer than I should have, wondering what that must feel like. Then I looked back at mine. No one came. "My name is Victoria," I whispered to no one in particular. Maybe I said it out loud because I needed to remind myself I still existed outside of this room. I'm 70 years old. Daniel is 73.
Or he was.
The man lying in front of me barely resembled the one I had spent most of my life with. His hands, once strong, steady, always busy, now looked fragile, almost translucent. His skin had that pale, distant tone I had begun to fear. We had been married for 48 years.
48.
And somehow I was here alone. "Mrs. Hale?" I turned my head slowly. Dr. Bennett stood in the doorway, his expression carefully balanced between professional calm and quiet concern. He was kind, I could see that, but kindness doesn't make these conversations easier. "Any changes?" I asked before he could speak. He stepped closer, glancing at the monitor, then at Daniel. "I'm afraid not," he said gently. "Of course not." I nodded, as if I had expected anything different. He hesitated before asking the question I had been avoiding. "Has anyone been able to come yet?" There it was. That question again. It hit harder every time, even though I knew it was coming. "Yes," I said automatically. "They're arranging things." It was a lie. A thin, fragile lie that barely held together anymore. Dr. Bennett didn't challenge me. He simply nodded, but his eyes lingered on the empty chair beside me, the one that should have been occupied by someone else. "Please don't hesitate to call the nurses if you need anything," he added.
Need.
What a strange word. I didn't need water.
I didn't need blankets.
I didn't need medication. I needed my children to walk through that door. But that wasn't something the hospital could provide. After he left, the room felt even quieter. I reached for Daniel's hand. It was cold. Not lifeless. Not yet, but distant. "I'm here," I whispered. My voice sounded unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. "I'm still here." The machines continued their steady rhythm, uninterested in promises or memories. I closed my eyes for a moment, and, against my will, my thoughts drifted back. I had called them. Of course I had. The morning after Daniel collapsed, I called our son first. "Hi, Mom," Ethan said, distracted. There was noise in the background, voices, typing, something busy, something important. "Your father is in the hospital," I said. "It's serious." A pause. How serious? The question felt clinical, detached. Very serious, I replied. I think you should come. Another pause. Longer this time. I've got a major deadline this week, he said. Can you keep me updated? Keep me updated. As if I was reporting on the weather. I called my daughter next. Mom, I can't just leave everything, Claire said before I even finished explaining. I have the kids, and flights are expensive right now, and Dad's strong. He'll be fine. That was 4 days ago. Neither of them had called back. Not once. I opened my eyes and looked around the room again. White walls. One small window overlooking the parking lot.
A chair no one sat in.
In the hallway, someone laughed. I flinched at the sound. It wasn't their fault, but it still hurt. I tightened my grip on Daniel's hand, careful not to disturb the tubes. These hands had built our life.
Literally.
He built our house from the ground up when Ethan was 5 and Claire was 3. I still remember him coming home covered in dust, smiling like a man who had created something that would outlast him. Those same hands had taught our son how to throw a ball, had tied our daughter's shoelaces, had held mine through every storm we ever faced. And now, they were still. I don't understand, I whispered.
Not to him. To the air.
To the silence. To whatever force decides how things end. How do you give your entire life to raising children and end up like this? As evening settled in, the hospital lights dimmed slightly, but the machines never stopped. They never do. A nurse came in quietly, adjusted something, and gave me a soft smile. You should rest, she said. I shook my head.
Ai fine.
I wasn't. But I wasn't leaving. What if he woke up? What if he needed me? What if this was the last moment and I wasn't there? So I stayed, hour after hour, holding his hand, listening to the machine, watching the rise and fall of his chest. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized something that terrified me more than losing him. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I already was. If you had asked me when everything began to fall apart, I wouldn't have been able to give you a single moment. There was no dramatic explosion, no one decision that shattered our family overnight.
It was quieter than that.
Slower, like a crack in glass that spreads so gradually you don't notice it, until one day the whole surface collapses. But if I had to choose where the change truly started, I would go back 12 years. Daniel had just turned 61. He had spent most of his life working construction, long days, early mornings, hands that never stayed clean for more than an hour. He wasn't the kind of man who talked about success, but you could see it in the way he stood when he looked at a building he had helped create. Pride lived in him, quietly but firmly. Then one morning he came home before noon. I remember the way the door closed behind him. Not slammed, not even loud, just heavy. He stood in the hallway for a moment like he didn't know where to go next. They're cutting half the crew, he said finally. That was it.
No anger. No shouting.
Just a sentence that changed everything. At first, we treated it like a temporary setback. Daniel kept saying the same thing. Work always comes back. And I believed him. I had always believed him. He had never let us down before. But weeks turned into months. And the calls never came. I watched something inside him slowly fade. Not his strength, not his kindness, but his certainty. He started leaving the house every morning dressed like he was still employed, carrying a folder with resumes that came back untouched. Every evening, he returned a little quieter than the day before. That was when Ethan began to change. Our son had always been ambitious. Even as a child, he wanted more than what we had. Better schools, better opportunities, a different kind of life. Daniel and I were proud of that. We thought it meant we had done something right. But ambition can turn sharp if you're not careful. The first time I noticed it clearly was during a family dinner. Ethan and his wife, Melissa, had come to visit. Everything started normally, small talk, polite smiles, the usual routine. But then Ethan asked, "So, Dad, what's the plan now?" Daniel straightened slightly. "I've got a few interviews lined up," he said. "Nothing certain yet, but something will come through." "What kind of work?" Ethan pressed. "Maintenance, maybe landscaping. Whatever's available." There was a pause. And then Ethan said it. "That's not exactly a step forward, is it?" The words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than anything shouted. I saw Daniel's face change, not dramatically, just enough. Enough for me to know he felt it. "Work is work," Daniel replied quietly. Ethan leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slightly. "I just don't understand how you didn't prepare for this. You've been in the industry for decades. Didn't you see it coming?" I felt something tighten in my chest. "Your father worked hard his entire life," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't something he chose." Melissa, who usually stayed out of these conversations, added lightly, "Maybe it's a chance to try something new. There are plenty of simple jobs out there for people his age." Simple. That word lingered in the air like an insult dressed as advice. Daniel didn't argue. He never did. He just nodded once and excused himself from the table. I found him later in the garage, sitting on his old workbench, staring at nothing. That was the first crack. After that, things shifted. Ethan called less often. When he did, the conversations felt rushed, like obligations instead of connections. His visits became rare, and when he came, there was always a subtle tension, like he was measuring Daniel against some invisible standard. Claire was different, but not better. Where Ethan grew distant out of quiet judgment, Claire changed in a way that felt colder, more practical, more concerned with appearances than feelings. She had married well. Her husband, Lucas, was successful, and their life reflected it. Large house, private schools, vacations that looked like something out of magazines. Somewhere along the way, she began to see the world through that lens, including us. "Mom, have you ever thought about downsizing?" she asked during one visit, glancing around our living room. I knew what she meant. The house wasn't modern. The furniture wasn't new. It wasn't impressive. "It's our home," I said simply. "But it's too much for just the two of you," she insisted. "And with Dad not working the same way anymore, wouldn't it make more sense to simplify?"
Simplify.
Another polite word with sharp edges. "We're doing fine," I replied. She looked at the kitchen, the carpet, the small details I had stopped noticing years ago. "Are you?" she asked. That question stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. The real turning point came later. Claire called one afternoon, her voice tight with stress. They needed money. Not a small amount. $5,000. Medical bills, she said. Unexpected expenses. Just temporary. They would pay it back. Daniel didn't hesitate. Not for a second. He told me we would figure it out. And within days, the money was gone from our savings. I didn't ask too many questions. I trusted him. That's what you do when you've built a life together. You trust without needing every detail. Months passed. The money never came back. Not even mentioned. Then one day, I saw photos online. Claire and her family on vacation, smiling on a beach somewhere warm and bright. Daniel didn't say anything when I showed him. But I saw it, that quiet hurt in his eyes. The kind that doesn't ask for sympathy. The kind that just settles in. After that, something between us and our children changed permanently. Ethan visited once a year, if that. Claire called occasionally, usually when she needed something. Holidays became smaller, quieter. Eventually, they stopped coming at all. Daniel started blaming himself. "I should have done better," he would say sometimes, late at night when he thought I was asleep. "I should have given them more." I never agreed with him,
But I understood why he felt that way.
because when people start pulling away, You don't immediately blame them. You look at yourself first. Sitting in that hospital room now, holding his fragile hand, I realized how long he had carried that weight. 12 years. 12 years of trying to prove he was still enough, still worthy, still their father. And, in the end, none of it brought them back. I looked at his face, calm, distant, almost peaceful, and a thought settled in my mind with quiet certainty. He had never failed them. They had simply chosen to forget who he was. And now, as the machines continued their steady rhythm in the empty room, I wondered if they would remember when it was too late. The morning Daniel died didn't feel dramatic. There was no thunder, no sudden rush of chaos, no moment where the world visibly broke apart. It was quiet, so quiet that for a few seconds after I opened my eyes, I thought nothing had changed at all. The same pale light filtered through the window, the same machines hummed softly, the same chair pressed against my side where I had fallen asleep. Then I noticed the sound, or rather, the absence of it. That steady rhythm I had listened to for days, the mechanical heartbeat that had become my anchor, had changed. It wasn't gone yet, but it was different. Slower, uneven, fragile. I sat up immediately, my neck stiff, my hand still wrapped loosely around his. "Daniel?" I whispered, though I already knew he wouldn't answer. Within seconds, the room filled with movement. Nurses came in quickly but calmly, like people who had done this many times before. Dr. Bennett followed right behind them. No one was panicking. That was the first sign. When it's not urgent, it means it's already decided. They checked the monitors, adjusted things, spoke in low voices I couldn't fully hear. I watched their faces instead. You learn to read faces in places like that. You learn to see the truth before anyone says it. And their faces told me everything. "Mrs. Hale," Dr. Bennett said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry." That was it. No long explanation. No complicated medical terms. Just a sentence that erased 48 years of shared life. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I didn't even cry right away. The moment felt suspended, like I was watching it happen to someone else. I nodded slowly, as if I had been expecting it all along, because in a way I had. I leaned closer to Daniel, studying his face. It looked different already. Not worse. Not frightening. Just still. The tension that had lived in his features for years was gone. The quiet worry, the constant effort, it had all disappeared. He looked peaceful. And somehow that hurt more. The nurses stepped back, giving me space. They always do that. They understand that the last few minutes matter, even if there's nothing left to say. I brushed my fingers lightly over his hand. "You don't have to try any more," I whispered. My voice broke then. Not loudly. Just enough. The tears came slowly, not in waves, but in a steady, quiet stream that I couldn't stop. They weren't dramatic, but they were deep. Years of things unsaid, unnoticed, unreturned. After a while, everything became procedural. That's the strange thing about death. No matter how personal it is, the world handles it like a checklist. Forms to sign, questions to answer, arrangements to consider. I moved through it all like someone following instructions in a language they barely understood. I nodded when needed, signed where they pointed, listened without really hearing. Time lost its shape. At some point, Dr. Bennett returned with something in his hand. A plain envelope. "Your husband asked me to give this to you," he said. I frowned, slightly confused. "When?" I asked. "A few days ago," he replied. He was very clear that it should only be given to you after. After. The word lingered. My fingers trembled as I took the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just paper inside. "He said it was important," Dr. Bennett added quietly, "and that you would understand." I nodded, though I wasn't sure that I would. I left the hospital shortly after. Walking out felt wrong. The world outside hadn't changed. Cars moved, people talked, someone laughed nearby. The sky was bright, almost offensively normal. I stood in the parking lot for a long moment, holding the envelope against my chest, trying to understand how everything could still exist when mine had just ended. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every street looked familiar, but distant, like I was seeing it through someone else's memory. I stopped at a red light and realized I had no idea how long I'd been sitting there. Eventually, I made it home. The house greeted me with silence. Not the peaceful kind, the empty kind. It was everywhere, in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the space beside the bed. 48 years of shared life had left traces in every corner, and now those traces echoed instead of comforted. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table and stared at it. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I made coffee instead. My hands moved automatically. Fill the kettle, wait, pour, sit. I didn't even realize I had done it until I was already holding the cup. It tasted bitter, but I drank it anyway. Finally, I looked back at the envelope. There was no turning away from it. I opened it slowly. Inside was a small key.
And a letter.
I recognized his handwriting immediately. Careful,
Steady.
familiar in a way that made my chest tighten before I even read a single word. I unfolded the paper.
Victoria.
If you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to say goodbye the way I wanted to. My vision blurred instantly, but I forced myself to keep reading. I'm sorry for leaving you like this. You were never supposed to face anything alone. My hands shook. There's something I need you to do. At home, in our bedroom, look in the closet behind my old shoes. You'll find a lockbox. This key opens it. I glanced toward the hallway instinctively, as if I could already see it from where I sat. Everything inside is for you. Things I've been preparing for a long time. A long time. The words didn't sit right. But before you open it, I need you to know something. Loving you was the best decision I ever made. No matter what happened, no matter how things changed, that never did. Tears dropped onto the page. You stayed when things got hard. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You were my home long before we ever built one. I pressed the letter to my chest for a moment, closing my eyes. The code is the day we met. I know you'll remember. Of course I would. I always had. I love you, Victoria. I always will. I sat there for a long time after finishing. The house was silent again, but it felt different now, like something was waiting. Finally, I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced myself forward, down the hallway, into the bedroom. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing did. I opened the closet slowly. For a moment, I didn't see anything unusual. Clothes, boxes, the same familiar arrangement. Then I moved a pair of his old shoes aside. And there it was, a small lockbox. I stared at it, my heart beating faster than it had in days. What did you do? I whispered. The question wasn't fearful. It was something else. Something deeper. I knelt down, the key still in my hand. For the first time since that morning, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not comfort, but a quiet sense that the story I thought I understood wasn't the full story at all. And whatever waited inside that box was going to change everything. I didn't open the box right away. For a few seconds, maybe longer, I just knelt there on the bedroom floor, holding the small key in my hand, staring at something that suddenly felt much bigger than it looked. My heart was beating harder than it had in days, not from fear exactly, but from a strange, quiet anticipation. Daniel had planned this. That thought settled heavily in my chest. He hadn't just written a letter. He hadn't just left something behind. He had prepared something carefully, deliberately over time.
For me.
I took a slow breath and inserted the key. The lock clicked open with a soft, final sound that seemed louder than it should have been. Inside, there were several things neatly arranged. An envelope of cash, more than I expected. A few small jewelry pieces I hadn't seen in years. Things I had assumed were lost or sold during harder times. But what caught my attention immediately was the notebook. It sat on top, almost waiting. Dark cover, worn edges. My name written on the front in Daniel's handwriting.
Victoria.
And beneath it, in smaller letters. What I never told you. My fingers hesitated before touching it. A quiet instinct told me this wasn't going to be easy.
But I opened it anyway.
The first page wasn't recent. It was dated years ago. I felt something shift in my chest as I read the first entry. March 12th. Victoria made Ethan's favorite dinner tonight. She pretended not to care that he didn't call, but I saw her check her phone 3 times. I told her he was probably busy. I hope she believed me. I blinked.
Confused.
I turned the page. Another date. June 4th. Claire asked for money again. Said it was urgent. I didn't tell Victoria how often this has been happening. She would start asking questions, and I don't want her to feel like our children only come to us when they need something. My hand tightened slightly around the edge of the paper. Another page. September 22nd. Sent Ethan some money anonymously. He lost a client, saw it online. He won't ask for help, but I know he needs it. Told Victoria the roof repair cost more than expected, so she wouldn't wonder where the money went. I stopped. Completely still. The room felt different suddenly. He had... what? I turned another page. Faster now. December 25th. Victoria was so happy when the flowers arrived. I signed Claire's name on the card. She kept saying how thoughtful it was. I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. My breathing changed. Shallower. Uneven. I flipped again. January 8th. Ethan didn't call for her birthday. Again. I bought her a gift and told her it was from him. She smiled the whole evening. My hands started shaking.
No.
No, that couldn't. I kept reading. Page after page. Entry after entry. A pattern forming. A reality I hadn't seen. Daniel had been creating things, filling gaps, covering absences. April 16th. Claire's son broke his arm.
Saw the post online.
They didn't tell us. Sent a package, games, snacks. Signed it from both of us. Victoria still thinks they keep us updated about the kids. I pressed my hand against my mouth. The room spun slightly. All those moments, all those small, unexpected gestures I had treasured, they hadn't come from our children. They had come from him. I flipped faster now, my eyes scanning, my heart pounding. Mother's Day. Ordered flowers again. Signed Claire's name. Victoria deserves to feel remembered. Thanksgiving. Ethan didn't come. Told Victoria he had a work emergency. She set a place for him anyway. Christmas. Sent gifts to the kids. No response. Victoria thinks they're just busy. The words blurred. Tears fell onto the pages, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I needed to understand. Every year, every holiday, every absence, he had filled it.
Quietly. Carefully.
Alone. The realization hit me all at once, like something breaking open inside my chest. I hadn't been holding on to small pieces of connection. I had been holding on to something he built for me. An illusion. A gentle, protective lie. I closed the journal for a moment, pressing it against my chest. "Oh, Daniel," I whispered. My voice cracked completely this time.
How long?
How long had he been doing this? How much had he carried, without telling me? I opened the journal again, slower now. More carefully. The entries became deeper as the years went on. Less about events. More about feelings. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know when they stop needing us. Victoria still believes they care. I can't take that away from her. I swallowed hard. He had known. All of it. For years.
And he chose not to tell me.
Not because he didn't trust me, but because he wanted to protect me. I turned to one of the later entries. She still waits by the phone sometimes.
Pretends she doesn't, but I see it.
I wish I could give her the family she deserves. My chest tightened painfully. I remembered those moments, sitting in the living room, glancing at my phone, telling myself it didn't matter. But it had, and he had seen it every time. I kept reading. If something happens to me, I hope she understands. I hope she doesn't feel foolish for believing in them. Hope is not foolish. It's the only thing that kept her smiling all these years. Tears blurred my vision completely now. I wiped them away, but they kept coming. I would rather carry the truth alone than watch her lose that hope. I closed the journal again, this time for longer. The silence in the room felt heavier than before, but also clearer somehow. Everything made sense now. All the small signs I had clung to, the unexpected gifts, the rare gestures, the moments I thought meant something. They had meant something, just not what I thought. They were love, but not from the people I had believed. They were from him, always him. I stood up slowly, the journal still in my hands, and looked around the room. The same walls. But I wasn't the same person anymore, because now I knew the truth, not just about our children, but about Daniel, the depth of his love, the weight he had carried, the quiet sacrifices he had made, so I wouldn't have to feel abandoned. And suddenly, something inside me shifted. Not just grief, not just pain, something else, something sharper,
Clearer.
For the first time, I wasn't wondering why my children hadn't been there. I already knew, and more importantly, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. They hadn't just drifted away. They had chosen to. I looked down at the journal one more time. You didn't fail them, I said softly. The words felt different now, stronger. They failed you. The room remained silent. But for the first time since I walked into that hospital, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt honest. The funeral was held on a Thursday morning. Gray sky, light wind, the kind of weather that doesn't demand attention but quietly settles over everything like a final curtain. It felt appropriate. Daniel had never liked grand gestures, and even in death, the world seemed to respect that. I organized everything myself. Every detail. The service, the flowers, the small gathering afterward. There was no one else to do it, and strangely, I didn't mind. It gave me something to focus on, something structured in a time when everything inside me felt scattered. The church wasn't full, but it wasn't empty either. Neighbors came. A few of Daniel's former coworkers. People who had known him not because they had to, but because they had chosen to. People who remembered him. That mattered more than numbers. I stood near the front, hands clasped, eyes forward, listening as the quiet murmur of voices filled the space. I recognized almost everyone who walked in.
Until I saw them. Ethan. Claire.
They arrived together, 15 minutes before the service started. I noticed the details immediately, not because they were important, but because they stood out. Their clothes were expensive, carefully chosen, polished. They looked like people attending an event, not saying goodbye to their father. They walked toward me slowly, almost cautiously. "Mom," Ethan said. His voice was softer than usual, but it didn't feel natural. Claire touched my arm lightly. "We're so sorry." I nodded. That was all.
No embrace. No words.
Just acknowledgement. They sat beside me in the front row, but the distance between us felt enormous. I could feel their presence, but not their connection. During the service, I listened to the words spoken about Daniel. Kind words, true words, about his work ethic, his generosity. his quiet strength, his willingness to help anyone without expecting anything in return. I heard story after story, things I knew and things I didn't. Moments where he had helped neighbors fix things without charging them. Times he had stayed late to make sure someone else's job was done right. Small acts that meant everything. I glanced at Ethan and Claire as these stories were told. They listened, but I couldn't tell if they were hearing. Ethan checked his phone once. Claire dabbed her eyes, but there were no tears. It felt practiced, like they knew how they were supposed to behave. When the service ended, we moved to the small hall nearby. Coffee, simple food, quiet conversations. People came up to me one by one, sharing memories, offering condolences, speaking Daniel's name with genuine respect. That's when it became clear to me. He had not been invisible, just not to the people who should have seen him most. Ethan and Claire stayed near the corner, speaking mostly to each other. I caught fragments of their conversation as I passed by. The house. Legal stuff. We should figure this out quickly. I stopped walking for a second, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. When most people had left, the room grew quieter. Just the three of us. That's when they approached me. Ethan spoke first. Mom, we need to talk about some things. Of course we do, I thought. Claire nodded, stepping closer. We've been thinking about what happens next. I looked at them, really looked, at their faces, their posture, the way they carried themselves. Strangers. That's what they felt like. What happens next? I repeated. Ethan cleared his throat. The house. The estate. It's probably best if we handle everything sooner rather than later. Handle. Such a clean word. Claire added quickly, we're just thinking about what's easiest for you. The house is big. It's a lot to manage on your own now.
Now.
The word lingered. We thought maybe selling it would make sense, Ethan continued. You could move somewhere more suitable. Less maintenance, more support. Support. Another polished word. I held his gaze. And what kind of support would that be? I asked calmly. Claire answered, her tone gentle but distant. A community. Somewhere with people your age. Services. You wouldn't have to worry about things. People my age. I almost smiled. Have either of you asked how I'm doing? I said quietly. They both paused, caught off guard. We care about you, Mom, Ethan said quickly. That's not what I asked. Silence. I mean emotionally, I continued. Have you asked how I feel? About losing him? Claire looked down. Ethan shifted slightly. We just thought. No, I said softly but firmly. You didn't think about that. The room felt still, not tense, clear. I reached into my bag and took out the journal. Daniel's journal. I held it for a moment, feeling its weight again. Then I looked at them. Your father left something behind, I said. Their attention sharpened immediately. Records, I added. Ethan frowned slightly. What kind of records? I opened the journal. Flipped to a random page. March 12th, I read. Victoria made Ethan's favorite dinner. He didn't call. Ethan's expression changed.
Subtly.
Claire glanced at him. I turned another page. June 4th. Claire asked for money again. Didn't tell Victoria. Claire's face went pale. That's not, she started. I didn't stop. September 22nd. Sent Ethan money anonymously. Ethan froze. April 16th. Sent Claire's child a care package. They didn't tell us he was hurt. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. I closed the journal slowly. Do you want me to continue? I asked. Neither of them answered. But their faces said enough. What is this? Ethan finally said, his voice lower now. This, I replied, is the truth. Claire shook her head slightly. We didn't know. No,
I said.
You didn't. I stepped closer, because knowing would have required you to pay attention. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Mom, we didn't ask for any of that.
I know,
I said.
and I meant it. You didn't ask.
You didn't call. You didn't visit. You didn't notice. Claire's eyes filled with tears now. Real ones. I'm sorry, she whispered. I looked at her. At the daughter I had once held in my arms. At the woman standing in front of me now. I believe you, I said. And I did. But belief wasn't the same as forgiveness. Sorry doesn't change what happened, I continued. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. We can fix this. I shook my head. No, I said gently. You can't. The truth settled between us. Final. Your father spent years trying to prove he was still worthy of your attention, I said. He gave you everything he had, and more than he could afford. I paused. And when he needed you, you weren't there. Neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left to say. I placed the journal back into my bag. The house is not for sale, I said calmly, and I'm not going anywhere. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Claire wiped her face, trying to steady herself. I turned toward the door. Each step felt lighter than the last, not because it didn't hurt, but because it was finally honest. As I reached the exit, I stopped for a moment. Without turning back, I said one last thing. If you want to honor your father, I paused. Start by remembering who he really was. Then I walked out, and for the first time in years, I didn't wait for them to follow. 6 months after the funeral, I stood in an airport for the first time in over 20 years. It felt strange. Not overwhelming, not confusing, just unfamiliar, like stepping into a version of life I had once imagined but never actually lived. The departure board flickered with destinations. Voices echoed over announcements. People moved with purpose, urgency, excitement. And there I was, alone. But not the same kind of alone I had felt in that hospital room. This was different. This was chosen. I held my passport in one hand, my boarding pass in the other, and for a moment I just stood there, letting it settle in. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine leaving the house without feeling the weight of everything I had lost. Now I was about to cross an ocean. All right, Daniel, I whispered under my breath. We're finally doing this. It had been his idea. Years ago. One of those quiet dreams we used to talk about late at night, when the world felt softer and possibilities didn't seem so far away. He had always wanted to see where his family came from, small towns, old landscapes, places that held stories long before we existed. There was always a reason to wait. Money.
Time.
Responsibility. There was always something more urgent. Until suddenly, there wasn't. The flight was long, but I didn't mind. I sat by the window, watching clouds stretch endlessly beneath me, thinking about how many years I had spent waiting for the right time. There is no right time. There's only the time you decide to stop waiting. When I landed, everything felt new. The air, the sounds, even the pace of people walking around me. It was different in a way I couldn't fully explain, but I felt it immediately. I wasn't just in a different place. I was in a different version of myself. For the first few days, I followed a simple plan.
Walk.
Observe. Listen. I didn't rush anything.
I didn't try to see everything.
I just allowed myself to exist somewhere unfamiliar, without expectations. And slowly, something inside me began to shift. I noticed it in small moments. Sitting alone in a cafe, without feeling like I was missing someone. Walking through quiet streets without checking my phone. Smiling at strangers without needing a reason. It wasn't that I missed Daniel less. It was that I felt him differently. Not as an absence, but as something that had shaped me into who I was now. One morning, I found myself standing on a high cliff overlooking the ocean. The wind was strong, pulling at my coat, tangling my hair, but I didn't step back. I stood there, looking out at the endless water, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom, not the kind that comes from escape, the kind that comes from understanding. I reached into my bag and pulled out his journal. I had brought it with me, not because I needed to reread every page, but because it reminded me of something important. Not just what he had done, but why he had done it. I opened to one of the last entries. I hope she doesn't stop living. That line stayed with me. I read it again.
And again.
He hadn't written about regret. He hadn't written about what he wished he had done differently.
He had written about me.
About my future. About a life he knew he wouldn't be part of. You don't have to worry, I said quietly, looking out at the horizon. I'm still here. The wind carried the words away, but I didn't need an answer. I stayed there for a long time, long enough for the thoughts to settle, long enough to realize something I hadn't fully accepted before. My life hadn't ended.
It had changed.
And that change wasn't something I had to fear. It was something I could choose. I extended my trip, not because I was running from anything, but because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I needed to rush back to something that was waiting for me. The house would still be there. The memories would still be there. But I didn't need to sit inside them. I could carry them instead. One evening, I sat in a small restaurant, surrounded by quiet conversations in a language I didn't fully understand. And for a moment, I watched a family at a nearby table, 3 generations, laughing, talking, sharing something simple but meaningful. A few months ago, that would have hurt. Deeply.
Now,
It didn't. I didn't feel envy. I didn't feel loss. I felt clarity. Family isn't just who you're connected to. It's who shows up. And sometimes, the people who show up aren't the ones you expected. When I returned home, everything looked the same. The house, the garden, the familiar streets. But I wasn't the same person walking through them. Mrs. Collins, my neighbor, greeted me with a warm smile and a small bouquet of flowers from my own yard. You look different, she said. I am, I replied. And I meant it. Inside the house, the silence was still there. But it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. That evening, I checked my messages. 2 of them. One from Ethan. One from Claire. Both polite. Both distant. Both too late. I listened to them once. Then I deleted them. Not out of anger. Not out of bitterness. But out of understanding. There was nothing left in those messages that I needed. A few weeks later, Claire showed up. Unannounced. She stood in the driveway, looking uncertain, like she wasn't sure if she had the right to be there. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on a cloth. I had been working in the garden. Hi, Mom, she said. I nodded. She looked around, then back at me. I've been thinking, she began, about everything you said. About Dad. I didn't respond. I let her continue. I want to make things right, she said quickly. The money, everything. We can pay it back. I studied her face. There was guilt there, regret, but also something else. A need to fix something that couldn't be undone.
why?
I asked. She hesitated. Because it's the right thing to do. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. It's the easier thing to do. She looked confused. Paying it back won't change what happened, I continued. It won't give him back the years he spent waiting for you to call. Her eyes filled with tears. I know, she whispered. Do you? I asked quietly. Silence. I stepped closer, but not too close. Your father didn't give you that money expecting anything in return, I said. He gave it because he loved you. She nodded, crying now. Then what should I do? She asked. The question lingered. And for a moment I thought about it, not as her mother, but as someone who had finally learned something important. You can't fix the past, I said. Her shoulders dropped slightly. But you can decide who you are from this moment forward. She looked at me, searching for something. Forgiveness. Permission. I didn't give either. Be better, I added simply. Not for me. Not to ease your guilt. For yourself. She stood there for a long time after that. And then she nodded. Slowly. Quietly. Before leaving, I watched her go without calling her back. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something Daniel had known all along. Love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes, it means letting people face the truth on their own. That night, I sat in the garden looking up at the sky. The same world, but a completely different life. And for the first time since everything changed, I wasn't just surviving it. I was living it. There is a strange kind of quiet that comes after everything has already been said. Not the silence of emptiness, not the kind that echoes or aches, but a settled quiet, like a room after the storm has passed and nothing else needs to break. That was the kind of quiet I woke up to one morning, several weeks after Claire had come to see me. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check for missed calls. I didn't wonder if anyone had remembered me. I simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, aware of my own breathing, aware of the stillness, and for once it didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something had finally stopped hurting. I got up slowly, made myself tea, and walked out into the garden. The air was cool, the kind that wakes you up gently, and the light stretched across the yard in soft, golden lines. I had started spending more time there lately, planting, trimming, rearranging small things that didn't really need rearranging. Not because the garden needed it, because I did. There's something about caring for living things that ask nothing from you except presence.
No expectations. No disappointment.
No silence waiting to be filled with excuses. Just growth.
Just time.
I knelt down near the corner where I had created a small space for Daniel, a place that wasn't a grave, but something quieter, more personal. A few flowers, a small stone, and the soil I had brought back from my trip. I think you'd like it, I said softly. The words didn't feel like talking to someone who was gone. They felt like continuing something that hadn't ended, because in many ways it hadn't. I had spent months thinking about everything, about our children, about the years that slowly stretched into distance, about all the moments I didn't understand while they were happening.
And now I did.
Not in a way that made it hurt less, but in a way that made it clear. People don't always leave loudly. Sometimes they leave gradually, quietly, choice by choice, until one day you look around and realize they're no longer part of your life, not because of one moment, but because of many. And the hardest part isn't that they left. It's that they chose to. That understanding had changed something inside me. It didn't make me bitter. It made me precise, careful with where I place my energy, my time, my attention. Because now I knew how easily those things could be taken for granted. A few days later, I received a letter. Not a message. Not a quick call. A letter. It was from Ethan. I recognized his handwriting immediately. Neater than it used to be, more controlled, like everything else about him had become over the years. I sat at the kitchen table before opening it. No hesitation this time. Just awareness. Inside, the words were exactly what I expected. Regret. Apology. Explanations. He wrote about being busy, about responsibilities, about how life had pulled him in too many directions. He said he hadn't realized how much time had passed, how far things had gone. He said he wished he could change it, that he wanted to try now. I read the letter once. Then I folded it carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. Not because it didn't matter, but because I understood something he didn't. Wanting to try now doesn't erase the choice not to try before. Time doesn't just pass. It accumulates. And so do the things we don't do. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Not out of punishment. But because I no longer felt the need to explain my silence. For years, I had explained everything. Made excuses. Filled in gaps. Now, I let the silence speak for itself. A week later, I booked another trip. This time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink it. I didn't wait for the right moment. I simply chose. Because that was something I had learned, something I wished I had understood much earlier. Life doesn't wait for permission. And neither should you. As I packed my suitcase, I noticed something small but meaningful. I wasn't packing memories. I wasn't packing grief. I was packing intention. Clothes for walking, not waiting. Shoes for movement, not standing still. And at the very top of the suitcase, I placed Daniel's journal. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me of something I never wanted to forget. Love is not measured by what you receive. It's measured by what you give, even when no one is watching. That was who he had been. And in a quiet way, that was who I wanted to be too. Just not in the same way. Not at the cost of myself. The morning I left, I stood in the doorway of the house for a moment longer than usual. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to acknowledge it. This place. This life. Everything it had held. I'm not leaving it behind, I said quietly. I'm just not staying inside it anymore. I closed the door. And this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like continuation. At the airport, surrounded again by strangers and movement and noise, I felt something steady inside me. Not excitement. Not nervousness. Something deeper. Confidence. Not in the world. In myself. Because I finally understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see for most of my life. I had always been strong. I had just spent too many years using that strength for people who didn't value it. Now, I was using it for myself. As I sat on the plane, looking out the window as the ground slowly disappeared beneath me, I thought about everything that had happened. The hospital room, the silence, the journal, the truth, the distance, the clarity. None of it had been easy. None of it had been fair. But all of it had led me here, to a life that wasn't defined by who stayed or who left, but by what I chose to do with what remained. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to escape,
but to rest.
And somewhere in that quiet space, I realized something simple. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for calls. Not for visits. Not for apologies that came too late. I was living.
Fully.
Deliberately. And without asking for permission. When I opened my eyes again, the sky stretched endlessly ahead. And for the first time in a very long time, so did my future.